Season 4 of Notebook on Cities and Culture is brought to you by Daniel Murphy, Polar Inertia, a journal of nomadic and popular culture, online at polarinertia.com, and by Press Up, friendly web consultants who listen to your goals and provide solutions that make sense, online at pressupinc.com. People that I've talked to, that I've mentioned that I'm interviewing you, they've said almost invariably she'll be a good one to talk about Toronto multiculturalism with. Why have you got that reputation?
I guess, the number one reason would be that I am the editor of The Ethnic Isle, which is a blog that we started 3 years ago. We, being myself and Navneet Alang, were the co-founders. So I guess that would be the number one reason, is The Ethnic Isle. And then also I've tried to talk about it in my own journalism and in my work. And I think that it's a new thing for people to talk about publicly. I think in Toronto for a very long time it was just like, oh, it's so diverse, it's great, you can eat whatever kind of noodles you want.
End of conversation, right?
Yeah. And so, yeah, that's nice that if I'm someone who's helped sort of push that conversation open and more broad, that'd be good.
And it is Toronto, by the way, where we're coming to you from today on Notebook on Cities and Culture, where I'm speaking on the east side of the city here, Queen Street East, with Denise Balkissoon. She writes about not just the subjects we've alluded to, but a variety of others as well. Very often real estate, yes?
Yeah, I write a lot about real estate.
I feel like there's a lot to be said about Toronto where the multiculturalism intersects the real estate. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Because you're seeing here what's happened in a lot of American cities where a formerly unattractive downtown is becoming very attractive and therefore very expensive. And so whereas, maybe in the 70s and 80s it would be the downtown that was both lower income and therefore probably less white. Now we have a downtown that's becoming higher income, and that's pushing a lot of, racialized communities to the periphery.
Which means the city ends up with what exactly? When you look at that periphery, what do you find?
It's not all low income. My parents live in Scarborough, which is one of the what we call the inner suburbs, because it's still Toronto, but it's not downtown. My parents live there. My husband's parents live there. They're sort of the generation where you went to live in the suburbs because you got a bigger property and, a nice big backyard.
That was the goal, in a way.
Yeah, but what's happened since then is that the transit hasn't kept up and the infrastructure hasn't kept up. So, I don't think that the suburbs are terrible, dangerous places. I go there a lot. The food is awesome. It's just hard to get around. And therefore, if you can't afford a car or to buy a house, then it can be a place where you get stuck and where there are pockets of poverty for sure.
It is a narrative I've been hearing about Toronto these past few days and reading well in advance, that Toronto was never really intended to be the size it is. And so the infrastructure has not really kept up. And for a while I was wondering, is that true? And I just experienced a bit of it when I was on transit here on the streetcar and I thought I would be half an hour early and got here 20 minutes late. So, we're not even that far out, are we? Where are we right now?
We're definitely still downtown. We are at Queen and Logan. This is part of the old city of Toronto, so it hasn't been a suburb since, I don't know, like the 30s or something like that.
It's pretty well ingrained with the fabric of Toronto now.
Yep. Yeah, this is still downtown, and it's still really hard to get around.
I guess so, but aside from the difficulty of transit here, what kind of a neighborhood is this?
So this would be formerly a working class neighborhood that's getting very, very rapidly gentrified. It used to be an industrial neighborhood, so south of where we are right now, there are lots of big factories that have closed. There was an old bread factory right around the corner from my house that closed. And now it's becoming, where people move to have a tiny little backyard when they decide that maybe it's time to buy a house and or have a kid.
But they do well with their tiny backyards here, it seems like. I've never seen tinier nor better executed tiny backyards anywhere else.
All right. Well, that's good.
Have you seen better elsewhere?
In other cities, I don't really think so. I don't know how many tiny backyards I've seen. No. I have a tiny backyard and I like it.
When did you first start writing about Toronto?
I guess when I first started writing, which would be around 2000, I was an intern at Toronto Life magazine. So,
how many publications can we read your writing in? It seems like a fair few from what I've read of yours. It's quite a wide range you've written in. Is that true?
Yeah, I'm a freelancer at heart. I'm probably a freelancer for life. So I write for the Globe and Mail, which is a national paper. I write for Toronto Life, which is a city magazine. I'm not going to remember everything now, but I used to write for The Grid, which was a really great city magazine, and it just went under a little while ago, which is too bad. I'm hoping to do some more writing for Chatelaine. I've written for The Walrus, which is a national magazine. Yeah.
You have managed to keep a pretty wide variety, as I say, of subject matter. It does happen a lot. Freelancers even get narrowed down quite rapidly. So how have you managed to retain the width of subject matter that you have?
I just pitch different subjects, and so I guess it's about getting informed enough on a subject that an editor thinks that you can write about it. You know, sometimes I feel like I should have a specialty. Sometimes I feel like with a specialty, you know, you're the go-to person for something, which I guess real estate, I'm a bit of that. I'm a bit of the go-to real estate freelancer. You know, it's hard to decide.
I would imagine that people who have not read what you write on real estate here, they'd be like, that seems like kind of a dull beat. But what makes it interesting to write about real estate here?
It's really ferociously competitive. So when you talk about the gentrification of the downtown, it's just, we've had bidding wars in Toronto for at least 5 years, probably more. And so, yeah, it's just very, very competitive. In a way, that's getting a little bit boring for me. Like, in a way, it is like, oh, look, there's a house that's just totally average and maybe even kind of crummy, and it's going to get 8 people all, you know, begging to pay $100,000 that we're asking.
You see that in Los Angeles as well, just these real estate blogs with posts like, look how expensive this house is, look at how expensive the median house is, oh my god. Why did that happen here? Why is it so expensive suddenly? Because
land is at a premium, and because the transit, you know, not just the public transit, but also the transportation, like highways and things, just has not kept up with the population. And so people's desire to live close to their jobs just is becoming more and more hard to live up to.
So there's this one infrastructural narrative of Toronto where, as you say, it's getting more expensive because the center is really the place that's viable to live if you want to get around easily. Yeah. Then there's the multiculturalism narrative, which for a long time it seemed to me, this is what Toronto is about, multiculturalism, having all these cultures in there at once, as you allude to, the being able to eat a variety of noodles. What is... And when I ask what's the story with multiculturalism here, I mean, what direction has it taken? Is it still sort of the city's great strength? How do you see it?
I definitely think it's a great strength on an everyday sort of personal level. Like, definitely wherever you go, wherever you work, you will see all sorts of multi-ethnic groups of people working together and enjoying each other's company. I don't think on a representative level, Toronto has really lived up to that promise. So in terms of, you know, which groups get the biggest say in the media or which groups have the most power, that tends to be traditional. There tends to be some stagnation. The election that's happening now, aside from the mayoral race, which I don't know if I even want to talk about it, but on the council level, there are a lot of really exciting candidates from all sorts of different ethnicities, and there could very well be a sea change this time around where we do actually get to see different communities, you know, have official representation at City Hall. That would be really exciting.
So what is it that has needed to change in your mind? What are the ways in which Toronto hasn't lived up to the sort of multicultural dream?
You know, just that idea for me of public life is really important. So, you know, who is in elected office and who does get their face and their name at the top of, you know, a newspaper column. I think there's a number of reasons for that. I think when immigrants come to a new place, they need a couple generations to stop just earning an economic livelihood and start sort of being representative. I think that happens on both sides. I mean, my own parents were not super excited when I decided to go to journalism school, because to them it's like, shouldn't you be, you know, a lawyer or an engineer?
Was that literally what they wanted, is for you to become a lawyer?
Definitely my aunts and uncle. Basically all of my cousins are engineers or some kind of medical professional.
Here in Canada?
And in the States and in England. One of my brothers is a lawyer, the other works in insurance. There's just an idea that those careers are safer and more financially respectable.
I would guess here in Toronto especially, you're getting a whole lot of people currently breaking away from that. You're enough generations down with many of the groups who came to Toronto that there's a big wave of people who are not being the lawyers and not being the expected professions. You know what I mean?
Yep. Yeah, and then I think the problem in terms of journalism is that it's hard sometimes to convince an editor that a story that happens in one specific ethnic community is necessarily interesting to everyone. So it's hard to maybe sell a city paper on that story, even though it is interesting to everyone and it's relevant to everyone too.
If someone comes to Toronto and wants to get an idea of what multiculturalism actually is here, I mean, what do they do? What experiences should they have? Not the noodle eating. What's a way to figure this out?
It's hard because Toronto is a place where it's just about like neighborhoods and everyday stuff, right? So other than going to eat things, like what are you going to do? You can walk around. You can go on the TTC and see everyone get frustrated together. It really is. Generally, when I travel, I like to go places where I know people or I know people who know people, so you can see what it's actually like to live there. And that's probably what you would need to do here.
I see. My own method is, of course, going around interviewing people, and I can say it works quite well, but it's not necessarily a scalable way of exploring a city. I mean, but having that way in, I mean, it's ideally, does someone need sort of a social link like that to each community they want to understand you? There's so many here, and if you want to get a sense of them below the surface, I mean, it would take, really, you just have to be embedding yourself in Toronto life a long time, right? You'd be here for decades. That sounds about right.
You could probably, there's a joke here that there's a festival every weekend, so you could probably find some sort of festival or musical or cultural event to go to, and people tend to be friendly, so you could chat up whoever you liked.
I want to get a sense of, you mentioned going to other cities as well, of how you think it compares to get a sense of other cities when you go to them versus the experience somebody might have in Toronto. I mean, what has traveling elsewhere reflected about Toronto to you?
Well, the good part is that it's very multicultural, and you can just walk around and not feel like you stick out. And that's great. You can just be yourself. You can meet all sorts of different people and make friends with all sorts of different cultures. I mean, the number one thing, are you interviewing Sean McAuliffe by any chance?
Actually today, yes. Later, he's next.
Okay, well, Sean's going to hate this. This goes out to Sean. I think that Toronto is not as physically beautiful as lots of other places that I've been to. So basically, when I go somewhere, I'm like, wow, look at the beautiful architecture here. Look at, the way they've preserved their architectural heritage. Look at the way they've taken advantage of, if they have a waterfront, which is one of Toronto's great failings. So usually I find that other places are better looking, and Toronto is just much more diverse and exciting.
It is something that comes up often, is that people will describe to me how ugly they think Toronto is, even if I didn't ask about that. Like they'll find a way to work in the ugliness of Toronto, but why is it thought so ugly? It seems like I don't really get some sort of oppressive feeling of ugliness about it. People usually put it down to the landscape, like it's not dramatic enough, or there's not a singular enough architectural style. If you think Toronto is not attractive, why is it? What about it makes it not attractive to you physically?
There is a real problem with preserving old, beautiful buildings here. People get to tear them down and then pay tiny little fines, so there's no disincentive for them to do that. And then in terms of newer buildings, there hasn't really been a lot of incentive to make them beautiful. Some of the newer condos actually now are beautiful, but everything that was built sort of in the late 80s and early 90s is very just like boring sort of glass, and it's taken up our entire waterfront. And
land era.
Yeah, nobody made an effort, and they just did everything as cheap as possible. So that's really the problem. And then also, I don't know if you're getting out to the suburbs, but they are very sort of typical and flat and strip mall-y.
Right. But I have heard you find even more solid multicultural enclaves out there. When you get to the suburbs, they get to be sort of more... You'll find... What do you find as far as the multicultural communities outside Toronto in the suburbs? I mean, do you really get that sense of... I've heard there are malls where it's entirely like just a couple different nationalities. And like, what do you find out there?
What do you find? I don't know Etobicoke very well, or North York. Toronto's very giant. So I know Scarborough, so that's where I'm from. So where my parents live, which is in North Scarborough, there's a lot of people from Hong Kong, so you get a lot of Hong Kong Chinese food, and there are a lot of Tamil people, so you get a lot of temples. It's basically the food that you get, the shopping that you get, and the religious faiths that you get, and they will tend to, dominate their little areas.
Right. And how essential do you think it is to get that experience, the suburban experience of Toronto multiculturalism, as well as the urban one, to get the whole picture? I mean, is it essential that you experience both before you can say you've experienced the multiculturalism here? I
think so. And getting back to the election, I think that's part of what happened, is that too many candidates in the past have ignored the suburbs. And so the first candidates that paid attention to it, even if they didn't do it very well, got the vote.
Right. So it's been revealed that can be a source of power if you actually acknowledge that the suburbs are there and they are voting. Right?
Yep.
It seems like here as well, a lot of cities, you think of the suburbs as being kind of uniformly bland, but the pattern seems to work differently. I mean, what's something interesting to you about the suburbs here?
That they are vibrant, that people live out there, I mean, they're...
And a variety of people as well.
Yeah, I'm like... so my father's a politician in Scarborough, and probably on any given weekend he will go to 3 to 5 events by completely different groups, different ethnicities of people. So, all sorts of different music and dancing and food and types of celebrations. And,
right. The entire spectrum he has to go. I mean, I imagine every politician has to familiarize themselves with every type of festival at least they might be expected to turn up at,
It depends where you represent, I guess, and how diverse that area is.
The things interesting about Toronto to somebody just turning up are going to be fairly different, I would imagine, to the things interesting to somebody who has been here for a while. Tell me what has become more interesting to you about Toronto over time here, over years of examining the place? I mean, what maybe wasn't so interesting at the beginning for you, or isn't to people who just turn up, that becomes more interesting?
I used to think that it wasn't cool to be from the suburbs, and now now it's like we want to go there. I mean, my husband and I on the weekends will try and find secret places to eat that we won't tell other people about, kind of thing.
Sure.
What else is interesting about it? I mean, Toronto's having such a moment right now, like, it's just everything about it is great, except for transportation. What's frustrating is that there's so many great neighborhoods, and it's hard to get to them.
It happens in Los Angeles as well. Sometimes the least accessible neighborhoods have the most interesting things. It's a frustrating dynamic, but you talk about eating at secret, or places that you keep secret when you go to the suburbs. I mean, why are those places so good? What about, is it the fact that it takes kind of a quest to get there, like the challenge itself builds it up for you, or is there something about that distance that actually gives you a different eating experience at these places?
I think it gives you a different eating experience. I think the whole anticipation and getting a car share and heading out there, but it's a different experience because it's just not, downtown. It's such a scene. It's like, is it cool? And does your waiter have enough tattoos? And
how far do his tattoo sleeves go? It's very important.
But it's much more, anyway, not to steal everything that Sean's going to say, but it's much more multi-generational in the suburbs. Like, downtown is very much about like young people and scenes, and in the suburbs it's about families, and it's more casual, and I like that I can do both of those things. Because sure, maybe sometimes I want to do something really cool and be, surrounded by young people and have a really great outfit on. But sometimes I just want really good food in a restaurant that like everyone can enjoy, and you don't have to feel like maybe you don't belong there or something.
Very specific cuisine-wise, but at the same time welcoming socially.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
Now, these are secret places, of course, but what types of food, what traditions of food have you most enjoyed eating in these outer suburbs?
Oh, that's so funny. Okay, well, there's one that's big enough that we can share. So Gourmet Malaysia up at Brimley and Shepherd is terrific, and their menu's huge, and they have really, really excellent Southeast Asian food. And then there are a couple of restaurants so both my brothers live in the States right now, and whenever they visit here, we have to go get Uighur food, which is like northern Chinese food. And there's one that's like very, very far out that is not close to my parents' house at all, that one of my brothers like insists we make a trek out to. What's really funny about these restaurants too is that they can be so rude to you. Yeah. And you're just like still going to keep going back and
still love
your money. Yeah. So that's another kind. Yeah, there's great Pakistani food. There's great Tamil food.
It really is similar to Los Angeles in that you go so far out. Have you been over to Los Angeles?
No,
much?
but one of my brothers just moved to California, Northern California last year, so we're hoping to make it all around the state.
Right. I mean, it's the same way in that people talk about the real places, quote unquote. You got to go 10 miles out, 20 miles out, 30 miles out. Just drive. First of all, these are places you'll probably have to drive to, and they're far away, and they're in a strip mall, and they don't look like anything. And I mean, this is the same thing as Toronto.
Yeah, very similar.
When somebody first comes to Toronto, I mean, this isn't something that's going to occur to them for a while, is it? To go very far out as well as see the inner circle as well as the farthest out ones. I mean, what are some ways to think about Toronto you find are helpful for people who just get here?
It's probably like any big city in that, I went to New York last fall and we only had 4 days there, and so you want to do everything and you just whittle it down to the 3 things that you can do.
Yes.
And if it's good enough, you'll go back. So, do your research, and it depends what's important to you, whether you're a food person or an art person or, whatever kind of person you are. And you just have to pick your couple of things to do. You can't do everything. Right. And if you do, you probably, so you have to go like deep rather than broad kind of thing.
It's true. I think about that a lot in terms of if it's a place you want to start a relationship with, you'll keep coming back to it, and it's a lot more interesting when you can do that. I mean, what are some of the non-Toronto cities where you've had that sort of long-term thing where you visit them once, you visit them again, and you get that sort of depth? Are there cities that stand out to you in your experience like that?
Well, let's see. One of my brothers lives in Chicago, so I get to go back there a lot. And yeah, you start off going to like big fancy restaurants, and then you end up at like Mexican food carts.
Sure.
The other one is moved just outside of San Francisco, so I'm hoping that will be my experience in San Francisco. I was lucky enough when I was a backpacker to spend almost a month in Buenos Aires, and yeah, you meet people and you end up going to little places. When we were in Thailand, we made really good friends with our tour guide who we spent about 10 days with, and by the end we were convincing him to take us places where all of the signage is in Thai, and so he has to explain everything that's going on to us. Where else? Oh, I don't know. I'm just gonna miss everywhere now.
Does this make you an especially stringent about, say, the Argentine and Thai businesses you go to in Toronto? Are there many of those?
Not Argentine, really. There's a couple of good Thai restaurants that have opened. It's hard because when you've been away for a while, you're like, oh, this is really excellent Thai food, and then you go back and you're like, no.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
What's fascinating you about Toronto right now?
Everyone seems kind of happy to be here,
So that itself is new? That they seem happy?
Because for a really long time, especially working in media, people just crapped on it all the time, there's like
So you're kind of on the defensive then. When you started writing about Toronto, was there like I should defend this place, or what were you feeling?
It was more that you would go to your editor. I would go to an editor and I'd be like, here's a really cool thing that's happening. And they'd say, I don't know. And then, 2 years later, it would finally make like a one-paragraph little thing in the New York Times, and then they'd be like, oh, we should write a feature about this thing.
God, it would have to go out and come back. I mean, I've heard of that phenomenon in Canada generally. Like, are you Canadian? You want to be big at something? First, make your name outside of Canada, then come back, and then they'll let you be famous or whatever in Canada. That happens? That goes on?
Yeah. So I think there's less of it. I think people are increasingly happy to be in Toronto of this moment and to be excited about stuff that's from here, designers that are from here. You can't discount the Drake effect, he really likes to mythologize Toronto, and I'm happy about that, it makes people feel kind of glam to be here.
What are some truly Torontonian things that come to your mind when you think of what's like representatively Toronto, whether it be person, place, or thing? What's really Torontonian?
Other than Drake?
I suppose we already mentioned Drake, so besides him. This might be an answer to the question even, because it is difficult to pin down the Torontonian. I mean, it's like mostly when I've talked to people about Toronto before this, they describe it not in terms of what it is, but what it lets in. It's like Toronto is a space that lets all into it. But can we be any more specific than that?
It's just so personal. So, my parents are from Trinidad, and then my husband's parents are like 6 generations Canadian, maybe sort of Scottish Canadian. And then our next door neighbors, one of them is Chinese via Vietnam, and the other one is Colombian. And we were all eating dinner in my backyard and making fun of my husband because he doesn't eat the heads of his shrimp. And I was like, this is such a Toronto moment. That's
once you've had the heads, you don't go back.
Exactly. Yeah.
Does your family call them the best part?
No, but they are.
But they're pretty good.
Yeah.
Pretty good. If you could, what's the sort of fantasy pitch, the article about Toronto or indeed Canada that you would want to do if only editors would let you? Or is it all fair game now, or are there still those like, if only I could write really in depth about this thing here, whether it be to do with the city, to do with the multiculturalism, to do with the real estate, the social scene? What's some sort of like, if only I could find out about this in depth and write about it?
Well, I don't know if this is glamorous, but I mean, in terms of writing about real estate, I wish I could stop writing about, bidding wars and how sexy it is that this house sold for $100,000 over. And I'd really like to look at housing as a whole and the effect on the rental market, and whether there's a generation rent that's becoming a political force. I haven't really sold anyone on that yet. I don't know. I feel on the spot. I feel like my stories aren't sexy enough, my story ideas right now.
Right. Certainly, it's not so much what's glamorous as just like, even it could be, there's something that really fascinates you, and you're never sure if it's going to fascinate somebody else. But it's more the idea of what I'm really curious about is what, the longer you're in Toronto, the things that start to fascinate you more. Like, there's things that I'm interested in coming here right away, but, it's like we started out talking a bit about the multiculturalism. You've got to be pretty tired of hearing that word. I would imagine, like, the concept itself is interesting, but the word maybe... Will there ever be time to retire the word multiculturalism here?
I guess it probably has been already, but what else are you going to say? I mean, diversity is also annoying.
Right.
That one's probably should be retired too.
It's true, because they're so general. Like, there's got to be a more specific way to talk about what goes on here. And Los Angeles I also like because of the diversity or the multiplicity of cultures or whatever, but it's more accidental there. It was the whitest city in America before 1965. After it's now the most diverse city. And it's a sort of unintentional multiculturalism there. Here, there's more of an intent, is there not?
I guess like in the 70s there was for Canada as a whole. I mean, what I might like to write about is more the interactions between different ethnicities, and also the interactions between different waves of immigrants. I don't think, people really write about or think about that enough. Whether, like the relationships between people from Hong Kong and people from mainland China, and the relationships between different types of South Asians, of which there are so many, that sort of stuff. I don't think the nuances of that gets into the mainstream media at all.
Who's new here? What groups have been coming in since you began writing about Toronto?
I think we have more Latin Americans. We didn't for a very long time. I think that's probably newer. But whatever you see in the world is what you see here.
It is. Yeah. It is a microcosm in that way. It seems like it's as close as any city comes to really being a microcosm. Do you think that's true?
Well, you want to say LA is the most diverse, and New York will want to say they're the most, and London will want to say they're the most.
There are all different groups in those cities here, though. None are. I wouldn't say Los Angeles is microcosmic just because it's biased toward Latin America and Asia. New York has historically been more European. Now I don't know. It seems like Toronto is keeping up with the makeup of the world. Would you say that may be true?
It seems like it, but who's to really say?
That's all the noodles of the world. We can say that.
Yes, definitely all the noodles and all the fried dough.
If they just get the transit up to speed, you're doing pretty great here, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's what's so frustrating about the political process right now is that it's like there are two Torontos. There's the one that's so amazing and great, and then there's the big P politics one that is not remotely satisfying right now.
You don't see the struggle between them ending anytime soon, do you?
Absolutely not. I mean, even if we got a terrific mayor, that doesn't look like it's going to happen, but even if we got a terrific mayor, it's other levels of government that have really let us down for a really long time.
It is from the city of eternal struggle. Every city has its eternal struggles. Toronto has these struggles here. We've been talking today on Notebook on Cities and Culture. I've been Colin Marshall. I've been talking to Denise Balkissoon. She writes about all kinds of things in Toronto. Real estate, multiculturalism. I would say things that sum up what my experience of Toronto has been so far, though I haven't bought real estate. I don't have the money for it. Denise, thanks so much.
Oh, thank you for asking.
Once again, it's been Notebook on Cities and Culture. I've been Colin Marshall. You can keep up with the cultural creators, internationalists, and observers of the urban scene on the show at colinmarshall.org. Thanks. Special thanks to everyone who backed Season 4 on Kickstarter, including Joel Neville Anderson, Daniel Levin Becker, Paige Calvert, Commander Manvark, Jonathan Crow, John Cunningham, David Dawes, James DeVito, Tim Dobbs, Paul Doyle, Jake Elliott, Kevin Emmett, Lawrence English, Jonathan Filbert, Andrew Philippone Jr., Michael Fransky, John French, Themistocles Eucrucius, Will Graham, Umberto Grant, Samuel Hansen, David Hayes, Jeff Hillenbrand, Mark Hines, Andrew Johnstone, Tadeusz Andrzej Kadlubowski, Peter Kavanagh, Ted Kane, Andy Cooney, Evan Landman, Alfred Lee, James Maloney, Sean McDonald, Alberto Bruzos Moro, Jason Miller, Rob Montz, Daniel Murphy, Richard Nash, Aidan Nullman, Patrick O'Flaherty, Danny Olson, Michael O'Regan, Ian Blosker, Christopher Porter, MJ Pritchett, Piers Rippey, Rob Schultz, Todd Shimoda, Cam Smith, Deborah Smith, Adam Sutherland, Maureen Kincaid Speller, Anna Traher, Thomas Unterberger, Matt Warren, Nick Weigelt, John Wolfe, Cynthia Yang, and Wayne Wright.